Mr. Mashupi, you had a question?
All right. I was very disturbed, but I think his question was fine.
Oh, with what you were saying.
Where I wanted to ask whether a will can override the common law, especially with the issues
Of inheritance, yes.
where you had disinherit your spouse. Can you disinherit your will?
Yes. According to the Supreme Court now, yes. The High Court had said, no, you can't disinherit it. Then Supreme Court said, of course you can. So for now, until the Supreme Court changes its mind, you can disinherit. He was asking, I had said in terms of the Wills Act, if there was a valid will before marriage, marriage nullifies that will. But, so his question was in terms of the common law, a spouse is entitled to inherit. So if I do if there's a will that is, what's the word? That is drafted after marriage, can it disinherit? And the answer was yes, so far, according to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court can change its mind. So for now, that is the law. Was that a hand? Well, theoretically, yes, but there are there are other laws that can protect dependents. There's the Deceased Family Maintenance Act, in terms of which a dependent can claim maintenance from the estate. So depending on what age they are, how old they are. That was the exact question that the Supreme Court dealt with. If you've excluded it, you've excluded it. But why are you in such a crisis? Why are you in such a crisis, Mr. You are the author of the will. So that is what you would have wanted. But you are more selfish than the law. Oh, after Prof.
There is something wrong that has gone on, and you just like go and change the will, exclude it, right? And then that it means that will supersedes everything that has happened before.
That's exactly what it means. Because what the law is saying, you see, because the law doesn't want to go into your will to start speculating on what was happening then. The law looks at your wishes and gives the effect to them.
Just an extension to that. Will the law then look at the time frame when that will was written? If it was so recent, like in this case I said a week, somehow you bump it out there and you die, and then it's still as valid as a will that was written 5 years ago?
Very, as long as all the requirements for a valid will are there. If you were of sound mind when you wrote it, if the witnesses saw you signing, then there's basically no reason and no basis for anyone to interfere with your wishes. So if you did it in anger, you now, unfortunately for the because of the state of the dead, you can't do anything about it. Maybe if you were of another belief, you'd come back as a Hlozi and sort things out. Yes, Mr. Tsaring.
I'm assuming that you are writing a will of those things that you own. The things that you probably own outside of the marriage that are not maybe held in maybe as common assets by the family, that maybe if you jointly buy a house, you can't then try to parcel that house to other people who are not part to the ownership of that particular house. Or maybe you can parcel out your half of the house. I don't know, how does that actually work? How do you define what you can put in your will?
Okay, very good question. What you can only give is what belongs to you. So your half share is what you are only able to deal with. So if we have a scenario where Mrs. Duve is the one who holds the title deeds, but you, Mr. Duve, feel that you contributed 75%, you can't. In other words, what is yours is yours. What is his is his. But most of the time is what is his is ours. There's this myth that, spouses automatically have a 50% share in each other's property. That can only be realized on divorce and after the spouse claiming the 50% has proved their entitlement. So marriage is contrary to popular belief and myth are actually out of community of property. But the nature of how people interact as they live together and go through life together is such that it's almost impossible unless people have become robots to draw a line that says this chair is mine, that chair is mine. I bought the 3 spoons, you bought 2 spoons. There are some people who are like that, but I can tell you 9 times out of 10, it's already a symptom that there's something wrong in in the relationship itself. That's why it culminates in divorce. It's just abnormal. It's not normal for people to record everything. They will have receipts from 1963. To prove that it's mine. So you must be careful when you visit. You may be sitting on the other spouse's sofa instead of because this sofa I contributed 80%, you contributed 20%, so your relatives sit on this. But my point simply is that in normal human interaction, in a normal marriage settings, the lines become blurred no matter how hard people want to distinguish whose property is whose. But that usually becomes relevant on divorce. The last one on...
I wanted you to speak from the point of where someone then is deceased. Remember when he was talking about the house that he has, he doesn't have any worries because he knows that it will go to the family. But I've got a very practical example, someone close. There's a my guru of mine. The mother and the father were married, and they had 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. Then the mother passed away. The father then remarried and had a wedding. Apparently they didn't have official children in this marriage. Then the father then passed away. And they had a house. Now it's the mining who is now in the house, and the children that were left, who were rightfully the owners of the house, they can't have access now to the house. How do we safeguard against such?
Well, I'm not sure when you say rightfully what you mean. Because, exactly, because,
But did you get the
I
scenario?
get the scenario, and what you have is a situation where a couple was married, couple number 1,
Yes,
the wife passed away,
yes.
this man then married, did not have children. His children from the previous marriage are now disinherited because mining has inherited. Let me follow ownership for you. I don't know whose house it was first in the first marriage, whether it was registered in this old man's or in both their names. But the minute the wife died, if there was no will, her half share went to
The husband.
this Madara. So the fact that he then married another woman gives her the same right that the law would have given this first woman had she predeceased him. So she inherits the house. If he had wanted to avert that from happening, he would have written a will saying that my children are going to inherit. Ah. Manje, your son is coming.
Children, a wise man leaves an inheritance to a children, and then their children, their grandchildren, and so on. And this is a classical example he has given. That you are leaving an inheritance. You intend to leave an inheritance, but there's been circumstances that changed, right? So the children are still there in the line. The law says something else. How do you reconcile that?
That's why it says a wise man. Because a wise man will be aware that the law is fluid. But in order to protect my children, this is what I need to do. Because a simple will would have dealt with this situation. But I said,
It will then come back to our common law, where we can then say a will cannot disinherit the spouse. So how best can we do it?
you mean?
Let's say this man had written a will
Uh-huh.
where he had disinherited the wife.
Yes.
That will can be challenged on the
No.
grounds of the common law.
No, it can't. The Supreme Court said it will respect a will like that. So, you know what I'm liking? You know what I like? Is the horror that you guys are expressing. So in order for you not to be horrified, put your affairs in order. Write down your thoughts. Yes.
I wanted to inquire, or maybe perhaps to compare the benefits of the two, because when you look at a will, the minute that I am now deceased, and then it's read, and then things are shared, it's gone. But there is another angle, again, I only hear, I'm not someone who's involved in law, but someone advised me of a trust, that something that can go on for more years, still keeping what you said, even though you are now deceased, what you wrote in that trust will still be standing no matter what happens. So I'm wanting to compare, is it better to write a will or it's better to actually put things in a trust?
A very good question, and you've led me to start on the subject of trusts. Thank you for that. A trust is, let me just give you a textbook definition so that is a fiduciary arrangement that allows a third party or trustee to hold assets on behalf of a beneficiary or beneficiaries. So it's basically a situation where a person who is known as a donor or a settler donates property to a third party, to the custody and care of a third party for the benefit of beneficiaries. So for a trust to be in effect, there must be three parties: the donor, the trustees, and the beneficiaries. If I donate, if I decide I'm going to be the donor, the trustee, and the beneficiary, there's no trust there because I'm just managing my own property. So in order for there to be trusteeship, there must be an element of a third party involved. The advantages of a trust, and like you've said, one of the advantages is that it can exist in perpetuity. It's like a company. But as long as your objectives are there, the beneficiaries are there, and whatever it is that you have set it up for is in existence, it will exist. The other thing, the other aspect is, the other advantage is that you have several people, usually. It's possible to have one trustee. So if you trust your brother enough, you can donate your property to a trust that is run by him on his own for your benefit or benefit of your children. Similarly, you can be a donor and one of many other trustees. So you can be a donor and have two trustees, including yourself, and still be a beneficiary. The idea is you are divesting yourself, you are taking away control of that property from yourself. So that relationship is governed by a document called a trust deed, which basically lays out the rules. You say exactly what you want, how things will be run, how meetings will be run, a quorum, how many that is. You define who your beneficiaries are. You can decide your direct family, your extended family, if the estate is big enough. Some even go to provide for communities, like to say Adventist schools or whatever, all in that trust. Then the disadvantage is that at the end of the day, it must run on resolution. There must be rules and regulations. So if the trustees resolve to sell, there's nothing unlawful about that. If you make a provision suggesting that they can't sell, but they're able to justify why they need to sell, then that sale will be made. So while it is a good idea, it will only work in the context of people who have the same vision, the same discipline as you. So I've heard this being said very often. Hey, I work for my kids. Hey, all these things are my children's. Our auroras will be saying it so that we hear and we don't have ideas about their things. But what I have observed over many years of practice is that as wonderful as these legal instruments are, the will, the trust, all that will come to nothing if the beneficiaries do not have the requisite skills and knowledge of how to use and apply wealth. What am I saying? You have said that you've heard that a trust is better than a will. I'll give you a very, very, very recent example that I witnessed with my own eyes. A couple created a trust, left 7 houses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a vacant stand for their 4 children. When the father died, the mother died first, then the father. Within 2 years, they had sold everything. They actually sat down as children and divided those properties between themselves. But you have property 1 and 2. Because mama and daddy vakambokutengera stand, you can't have this. They did it very mathematically. Precisely. So yes, you are correct that a will and a trust are the better evil. I'm just going beyond the documents to say, look, even when you do, these children we need to transfer skills, we need to transfer principles. Because I see it so often. Parents, this couple I'm talking about were my clients for many years. And I would ask them, why don't you spend some of your money, go on a cruise? Tikushandira vana vedu. But you see, within minutes, because these children were entitled and they had absolutely no knowledge of how to manage money, they were paupers. The one is actually living in a bachelor flat now. So you can't legislate common sense and how to and how to manage your finances. Mr. Mashubuko, is that a question?
That's a question. Can anyone set up a divorce?
Yes, anyone.
Can you confirm by what are the tax implications when I cede property into a trust?
Okay, all right. Let me explain that to you. Maybe I got carried away and started lecturing you about how we should raise our children. So the donor, that will be the person setting up the trust. The trustees are people, just anybody who's over 18, who you trust, really, as the name suggests. And you can decide as the donor in terms of your rules. Are you going to pay them board fees? Are you going to pay them sitting fees? Or are you going to take people who won't demand that from you? Then your beneficiaries, like I said, are as per your definition. So the process is simple. If you want, in forming a trust, no, there's no ZIMRA implications. Forming the trust itself, because the trust it's just the legal body. Maybe what you do with the trust is what will attract ZIMRA obligations. For example, if you want to transfer your property that is in your name to Two. Uh-huh. It's,
a suitable instrument for someone who doesn't have a lot of properties per se?
well, as an estate planning tool, the best time to form a trust is before you start accumulating wealth, so that you don't incur big obligations. Because once you have a trust and you decide now that I want to transfer my property from my name to the trust, that is deemed a sale by ZIMRA. So they will take their capital gains from the transfer. So you weigh that against that same property going into your estate. If you have one property, then you know that it's exempt from duty. So you'd rather write a will so that transfer will only be effected posthumously into the trust, if that's what you want, or give it to anyone you want. So how you use the trust during your lifetime is dependent on what it is that you want it to do. Even if you don't have a big estate, it's a good tool to have. It's just the timing. But if you have a property now and you want to transfer to the trust, unless you have very big fears of divorce and whatever, I would suggest you instead form a trust, write a will in which you give that house to the trust, so that you don't pay all these taxes unnecessarily, because it's ZIMRA capital gains and transfer duty. If you wait and just die, it will be the property will just go into your estate, and from your estate into the trust.
Then maybe lastly, how long do you then need to survive after setting up a trust?
In order to do what?
How long do you need to outlive your trust, the setting up,
For what purposes?
for it to be effective?
No. Your trust is effective even during your lifetime. It's not necessarily something you use only when you are dead.
I've heard that you need to outlive it for at least 5 years.
For what purposes? It's
Yeah, but go and check. Unless if it has changed, I understand you, after setting up a trust today, you then need to outlive it with at least 5 years for it to be effective. If you die within the 5 years, then the property will default to your own ownership.
I'm not sure about that. Maybe
Yeah, just check.
Kuti, you can tell me what, in terms of what legislation, because as far as I'm concerned, it's just a legal entity. It would be like, maybe it's, I don't know, but I will stand to be corrected. So those are the things that you need to consider. Then again, you are putting your estate in the hands of people that you trust, but you only know them to the extent that they will allow you to know them. So the minute you are no longer there, that elder that you trusted so much may not have your interests at heart. But again, that's a risk everyone takes. Even your spouse can marry somebody else and disinherit your children. But again, all I am saying is that at the end of the day, as wonderful as these estate planning tools are, what is important is to transfer skills to our children so that they know how to manage wealth. so many stories. Some have inheritance left for them, but in the leafy suburb of Mount Pleasant, he has tenants inside the house because he just can't, he can't grow that wealth and maintain it and expand it. Where his parents left him is exactly where they'll find him. In fact, they find him worse off. I've observed people often say, that's why I think you find all these bus operators, after he dies, the business crashes. Then we say he had a chikwambo. He's not a chikwambo, he just didn't transfer his skills to his children. So the minute he dies, all the business secrets die with him. I've observed white people, I've observed Indians. White people, their children are taught hardship. We don't live with them, so we think they are very soft people. They are not. They will go, a child will be told to go BMXing. That child will break every limb of their body. But anongwarama chinzi dzokera. Rugby, they'll break their noses, they'll break their thing. Isuzu, Idini, my child, no, that won't happen. But that's where the hardship starts. That hardship will then be translated into, as soon as, usually by the time they are 14, they start teaching them whatever business they are in. Very practically, if they are running sales of cars, they know exactly how to sell a car, what the specs are, what it is. Then they graduate into the business. Those who are academically inclined will be taught how to will go to university, go and learn from another business that's bigger than them, and come back and apply those skills. They are so dedicated to teaching their children that they even teach them alcohol themselves. It's not a good thing. No alcohol, actually. But what they do, that's just how much involved they are with their children. When they are 16, they will tell them, this is how much, no more, no less. They teach. Same with Indians. They will teach them how to run that corner shop, how to order fabrics, how to keep the books, what to do. That's why their wealth is generational. There's no magic. We don't have chikwambo. This business of I'm working for my children and creating entitlement without giving the necessary steps is what is killing the generational aspect of our wealth. We need to toughen up. We need to stop, and I'm including myself, we need to stop romanticizing the life we didn't have. You didn't have it, you didn't have it. But the good principles that you had in that life will still help this generation so that generational wealth is created. I had a situation where I was sitting with two men who are 70. One is a chartered accountant, one is a lawyer. Both have accomplished much in their fields. But guess what? Their children, they sent their children to proper private schools, paying top dollar. Their children can't take their grandchildren to those schools. They still live with them at home, and they still pay fees for their grandchildren. Maonaka. Saka whether there's a will, there's a trust, kana ichenda pakadaro, you might as well be. Kuti it's pointless. You had a question?
Revocable trust and an irrevocable trust. And I want to understand if putting your assets in a trust will make it immune from personal debt.
Okay.
For example, I've seen people come who say he owed us, and then they claim whatever they were owed at a funeral. If you create a trust, is it immune from such requests to settle personal loans?
Yes, unless you borrow in the name of the trust, because it can borrow, unless you limit the powers so that it can't. So it's separate from you. So your debts are separate from those of the trust. And irrevocable and revocable, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you have created a trust and there's a clause for winding it up, you can wind it up at any time. If you decide as a donor and you've given yourself power that you can change your mind at any time, then that can be done. At the inception of the trust. But I don't know, maybe Mr. Chifia can help, how I can bind myself beyond what I want in perpetuity. If I change my mind, surely I should be able to do something about it. Okay. I thought you had a question as well, or contribution. Yes.
You know, this kind of talk where we are always saying, I'm doing this for my kids and I'm doing this for my kids. As long as you don't invest in their character development, I think we can agree that we are wasting time, if I should use that kind of extreme, phrase. We are wasting time. We would better spend the money for ourselves and I mean, and God's cause than to give an inheritance to a child who is irresponsible. And as much as you're explaining that, we have seen these things happening and we are not immune to them. As long as you are, in fact, if you go and you're studying maybe the councils on stewardship and so on, when Ellen White is commenting on these issues of wills and inheritance and so forth, these issues to do with character, I think we become accountable to God ultimately. If I have, say, $1 billion, and then on one hand, God's cause is calling for resources, and I'm writing a will where I'm giving my inheritance to my irresponsible children, for whom I know whatever I'm giving them is going to be put into Satan's ranks, then I think from a stewardship point of view, we will not be doing fine. I think we need God to help us so that by the time we are giving these kind of benefits to our beneficiaries, at least they have the character that's required to really carry on with all. Otherwise, it's wasted. Otherwise, we can brag, we can be proud, we can be telling people I'm doing this for my kids. But ultimately, if there's no character, it's actually pathetic. Actually.
Thank you. That is what I wanted to drive home. That all these instruments are good, but at the end of the day, for it to be generational wealth, it must be inheritance that is given. For so to speak, kunevanhu vane musoro. So if we are raising headless children, we might as well eat our money. But any more? Okay, there we go.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask questions which are relevant to me.
Yes, go ahead.
The first thing that I want to know is what will happen if, let's say, I die with the assets that I have, what will happen to them if I hadn't written a will? And then the second question that I have is, I know our church standing of this is a little bit controversial, but I'm still not convinced. Does the state, our government, recognize prenuptial agreements? And if a person, if I happen to get married, right, and write a will, does it nullify that prenuptial agreement? Or if I die, does it nullify that?
Very interesting questions. One, your question is if you die in what, as a single young lady,
Yes,
and you don't have a will,
yes.
the sequence is clear. It's your parents first, then your siblings. Your parents, if they are no longer there, then your siblings. If it's a large estate, then your parents up to a point, then they share with your siblings. Then your second question was prenuptial agreements.
prenuptial
Yes,
agreement.
they're called antenuptial contracts, but that's the same. It's a prenuptial agreement. They can be entered into before marriage and must be registered with the Registrar of Deeds. So that we have it on record that the two of you want to exclude certain things from your marriage estate.
So if I happen to die, right, does it nullify that? Or if I get married and I make another will, does it nullify the assets that I put in that prenuptial agreement? Or I can choose to say, they remain where they are, I'm only including the assets that we've gained together.
Okay, what a prenuptial contract does is that it's made in anticipation of marriage. You are saying, I'm about to marry the love of my life, who swept me off my feet, but my things, no, they're not going anywhere. My things are not in love. They will stay where they should be. So what you're saying is that this is a contract that I've entered into with the man I'm going to marry. And the two of us agree that with respect to these assets, this is how far we are going. This is mine, this is his. In Zimbabwe, it really isn't necessary because marriages are out of community, but in places like South Africa where marriages are in community of property, they then talk about how their property will be treated even when they get married. So that's the point to the prenup. It's saying what you want to become of your matrimonial assets. If you were to die without a will, that's your question, this prenup will manage those assets that you've dealt with in it. Whatever was acquired after would then be distributed according to common law. So your spouse will inherit whatever was, if there was a house, he will get that. He will inherit whatever is due to him in terms of the law, together with any children you may have. If there are no children and the estate is big enough, it will be spouse, then spouse and your siblings, spouse and your parents and siblings in that order. And the third question?
You've already included
No, I've
it.
answered it. Okay. Yes. Because what you are saying is, this is my property. And the other party is saying, I understand, it's your property. So I won't make any claims. Whether you die, we get divorced, or I don't know what other possibility there is. Yes.
I just wanted to ask that maybe can we then move to the Christian advice? Because as I see it, that advice, I think at common law or at the courts, I think, yes, that's fine. But at church, can we then advise that let's do prenups when we then get married? Because I remember when we get married, we say, Mawa nyama yenu." And those so in that aspect, I don't see the prenup really coming into play if we are remaining within the church statutes. But well, when we are out there, I think it does. But in the church now, prenups,
It
and you're
can't.
married. I don't know how it sounds to.
Actually, even in the world, it's usually symptomatic of something that is wrong. Because it's usually suggests that people are really focused on things. And 9 times out of 10, that relationship, at least in the Zimbabwean context, already has problems. I've done 2 prenups. One, the marriage failed within, no, 3 now. 2 marriages failed within 2 years of that prenup. One, it's still there. So let's pray. It's still going, it's limping. But it brings, it gives a sort of, it's unpleasant. One person won't be happy with that arrangement. So people will go through it reluctantly. And you see, it's always a question of what does the other... One, I can tell you, one was my nephew who entered into such a thing. And he kept saying to the bride, if you don't love me for my money, uri kurambira kusaina." And she kept saying, "But we're getting married, these are our things." I said, "No, they're not." So clearly already there was problems. No, maybe he was too attached to his things. Maybe then my nephew was too attached to his things.
Those kind of situations where the family of the bride, okay, before she got married, she had acquired the assets and all that. But there's a difference between what she has and the groom in terms of possessions and things like that. So everyone else comes around and says, we are not too sure about the true intention, like you were saying that there will be some issue about what there are these young men who are actually getting into marriage like a commercial transaction or something like that, and they are looking at the wealth that this bride has, and they're targeting that. So the whole family then says, "No, look, we can't accept. We can't, all these pressures come around, and then they end up saying, no, look, I think for now, let's have this kind of prenup, and then yeah, it goes like that." So there will be some explanations and circumstances, behind where someone is saying, okay, if we are not going to do that, then the next thing is after 1 year, 2 years, they're divorcing, and so on. So it's a lot of background issues.
Thank you.
Can we have a prenup of something that is going concern like a company? Can we have a prenup of something that is going concern like a company?
Or like to put it in...
Yeah, is it possible?
Well, technically it is, but I guess at the point of departure, if one party can then say, this is in the prenup, but I have been contributing to its life, then that becomes a different conversation. So it would be tidier not to, but technically you can.
That I really have to process. And so maybe for those who have the resources, these huge assets, maybe it makes sense for them to say, I want to continue to have a say in what I've acquired, regardless of the change in my marital status. I should be able to dictate what happens to this, even if I die, I know this one will be sorted, they will be fine. But these other resources, I can leave them to these other guys, to the church, and so to do whatever they want to do. Why am I saying this? You are saying, what is the Christian advice? I just want us to also maybe run away from the issue of trying to be very prescriptive in everything. Do prenups, don't do prenups. In South Africa, like you mentioned, maybe there the marriage is in community of property. And like someone says, you can only know someone up to a certain level. And more so before you get married. Even after marriage, some 19, 20 years, you are beginning to wonder, do I even know this person? Who is this person that I married? And so maybe you are also just trying to protect those assets, to say, should this person turn out to be a monster, I don't want them to be distributing what I have put together in a way that they want to, because unfortunately now divorce is becoming even common even within the church. Yeah, those percentages of divorce in the country, they are creeping into the church and they've been rising. And so some of the young people, they have genuine fears to say, okay, this might actually happen to me as well. And I need some kind of protection in terms of how somebody is going to handle these things. And there are those that you was talking about who are getting into marriages as a commercial enterprise. They don't want to work hard. They only want to work hard at looking at finding out who has the means that can sustain them should they get into that relationship. Maybe that's all the work that they do. And so someone might want to protect themselves. Should I find myself entangled with such a person? I know we'll start saying those so they don't have enough faith so that God can lead them. Yeah, at times you ask yourself, did you have enough faith to end up in certain situations where you've ended up in? Life can happen, things can happen. So I think it's very difficult for us as a church to be very prescriptive on some of these things because people's circumstances differ. And so I think we should just maybe guide people to say, like you were mentioning, maybe at some point it might appear as a lack of trust. To say, so you don't trust me, you think I'm only here for your things. So this is why you don't want us to be in community of property and so forth, because you want to exclude me, or maybe you're actually planning to divorce me after some time, so you are trying to protect yourself, so you are not genuine getting into this marriage. There are those issues of trust that might come in, but I guess if you have the means, and maybe the other one, this is why they also say marry within your own grouping, so that no one will then say, I just trust Mkwasha. We are not sure if he's here for the love or for the things. And the whole family is sitting down to discuss your name, whether you love their daughter or you love their daughter's things. It's a complicated situation. And maybe the only way around it is now for the guy to say, you know what, I genuinely love this girl. Things or no things, I can do a prenup with her. So that her things are her things. I want her, excluding her things. And so it can be a compromise position to say, okay, then you can silence the family and you enjoy your love outside of the assets, and the family can enjoy the assets and you enjoy the daughter.
Yes, Out.
Thank you. When you look at trusts, how successful are they in terms of intention? So I'm sure there will be objectives of those trusts from when they are consummated. And over time, as they go 5 years, 10 years, then death, etc., when applied, how many, from a percentage point roughly, have you had perhaps successful, or perhaps they create other issues? Just trying to get a sense, because still the issue of trust is its advantages, but the other side of competency of the trustees collectively, because that's what I hear, because it's not a one-man or one-woman show. It's a collective difference to your character. So you have two characters, the composite and yourself. Visions, because this is imposed vision. The trustees don't have a vision, it's imposed. But over time they've right to think what they suppose should be. And to what extent does maybe trustees continue with the initial objective, or they start to fluidly move away from the intended?
That's an excellent question. Unfortunately, I don't have statistics, but what I can tell you is trusts, usually, family trusts in the personal sense, usually work during the lifetime of the donor. The minute the donor is out of the picture, people separate themselves from that entity. The trustees, your trusted friend will suddenly think, hapana zvandikuwana pazviri izvi. The widow will express distrust, the beneficiaries will express distrust. So I guess the same problems could arise even in a company setting. I can't even say it's a cultural thing, because even white people will fight over that kind of thing. But like you say, you can't transfer your vision to other people. But I've seen trusts that were formed in the 1920s that are still working. And I'm not sure what their secret is. Maybe it's shared vision, maybe it's... a cultural thing. If these children had been trained, they would see things differently, and they would call out to this auntie Zetsotsi, she's stealing from our trust, without necessarily destroying the trust.
Yeah, a follow-up on that about protecting the assets. Now, is there no opportunity to put in a clause about time framework after the person is gone? To say for the next 50 years, the assets cannot be sold, they have to be managed within the trust. So, I mean, I've heard of the Gates, Bill and Gates, of course, the foundation. They've said 25 years after both of them are gone, they will dissolve, right? So they've already put the foundation will be gone, either Bill or Melinda, the day one, the last one of them dies. 25 years later, so the foundation is protected for the next 25 years. So after they are both deceased. So I'm saying, is there no provision for a clause to say we want this trust to be sustained for the next 50 years after both of you are gone?
You definitely can say things like that.
So with that basically all these children we are worried about, we are all saying that they don't have the vision that we have. So within 50 years, they will have to learn to have a vision if they have to benefit from that. Yeah. So these are safeguards around. There are assets that have been left. They are there. They have to manage them well. And by 50 years, they will be also old. And as trustees, they will know the benefits and also try to extend that. That's why you said for some white people's trustees from the 20s up to now, 100 years, they're still going strong. So these clauses, I think, they are very important.
They will help. The reason some children may not be in a hurry to access assets held in trust is because they are making their own. But what usually happens is that people don't have money and they are looking at this house that you've left in the trust and thinking 50 years. No, 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 no. We can't wait 50 years. I need school fees in January. There's always, as long as they've got room to make decisions, they can even amend the trust so that they can make decisions to sell. And if it's a trust that incurs liabilities, they may not have a choice. They could have borrowed against an asset, now the bank wants to foreclose. Then they think we'd better sell. So at the end of the day, all these instruments will only work panevan vanechi, vanem soro. So I'm not taking away from the practicalities and the advantages, but I just wanted to hit home that a trust is not a magical safeguard to any state. You can have the most elaborate trust, but so many things can be done. I've told you the heartbreaking story of 7 houses being sold in 2 years. From people who would live like hermits, but because they were spending every cent on investing, building a property portfolio for their children, who, by the way, were adults. Venzivana, Vatuama adults. And they were sent to the best universities. Some went to England, some to South Africa. So it's not like the parents didn't invest. They invested in their education, but they continued to work for them when they should have started working for themselves. So if we don't want to be 70, looking after our children's children, let's deal with them. Elder Fungur.
Maybe this is asking you something that's direct senses your space. So perhaps we could have been talking trusts, we could have been talking wills, the legal instruments. But you also brought in the aspect of training. I think you emphasized, Chivia also had him hammering the same point from a different angle, and you both are lawyers. So maybe not necessarily advice, because you're in this space and so forth. What do you generally see in Zimbabwe so that you can be more relevant to a situation rather than just to be just shooting points from a point of just understanding what this means, how this is applied, etc. The general society of Zim, what have you seen and what would you advise that we should think of? And more so, I think that was my brother's point when he was saying, as Christians, then what do we take away out of this lesson as a takeaway? So we've had all these aspects, technically so, legally so, etc. But what would you sort of like advise? Not to be bound by that, it's just maybe what you see, because you're in the space a bit more than some of us.
What I've observed is that the owner of the vision, whether it's the mother or the father, is consumed by it, and they know how to make money. They know how to sweat capital. They know how to invest. They know how to do A, B, C, D. They know the risks. They know. But they are so focused on cushioning their family to the point of neglecting it. They, like I was saying, this, I don't want my children to experience what I experienced. And yet I was thinking, do you know, people who grew up in the rural areas know how to read the season, know how when to plant. Vanokudza kuti not now, not yet, haisati yanyatsokuuya mvura. Then, but how did they acquire those skills? They were taught by their parents. How does a young man or even young lady know how to sunga mombe? They were taught. But now the modern father and mother, too busy making money and throwing that money at children without realizing that that money is killing the child, is killing their ambition. They don't get it. They become so entitled. And dad, because he's so busy making money, because dad, can I have an iPhone 14? Imari, 1,003. And mom hardly sees dad, thinks dad is spending his money anyway. Sure, mrukunyima mari, but tete ningi wakauya akapfura. Then, so we are building these, we are raising these entitled children. Not that, it's not practical. I personally don't believe in mwana can drive a Range Rover. They can drive a Range Rover, but it's the attitude with which they drive it. They must be able to be given skills. Yokwita built on that. I don't know what is higher in terms of rank than a Range Rover. Maybe Inonzishi, Urus. What you call this? Lamborghini, yes. Kuti exactly. Kuti they should then have the ambition and to have the skills. But yeah, we've got 9 cars at our house and you just take the one in a fuel. That is their lifestyle. But if that lifestyle, I'm not saying kuti mwana must necessarily, because again, I don't want to glorify poverty. Hapana chinoshamisira poverty. It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing, and I think it doesn't honor God at all. But achi drive a Vitz, whether I drive a bus or I drive a Vitz, I drive a Range Rover, as long as the right mindset is within that child, they will make it in life. So what I find is that it's a generation which just piled on and a luxury without the necessary teaching. So that generation will pay by looking after adults. Because there are so many people who are looking after their children, vakarora, looking after their grandchildren. In speaking for myself, I don't want, no. So that won't, So what I find is that you need conscious. And in our African setting, the other thing that complicates that is that these successful business people would then have multiple wives. So once you have a barika, you have competition. Your dad has bought so-and-so with mother something, so demand that as well. So what the children learn is just competition and hate. They don't even know kuti mabasa baba mangani, where do they, what routes do they apply, what's the trick. So when he dies with all that knowledge. And you'll find that 9 times out of 10 he's trusted lieutenant. Ndiye akutotanga company yemabhazi. Tofunga kuti aivabira. No, he has the knowledge because he was there watching. So that's what struck me. There's this gap. Here reality, here reality and perceived reality. But as long as the parents are alive, that lifestyle is sustainable and growth will happen. Parent ikangonza isisipo. That's it. What we have is an accent. And yeah, that's it, and liabilities. Yeah, my dad. But again, like I said, it's not, I'm saying it's affluent people. Even vanhu vasina chavanacho, you have people who are struggling kumusha because vanhu vanenge vachiti saka mudhara aenda kumaricho achauya achipa mwana mari yekuti aende kundari. So I don't know where this cultural problem is coming from, but what we are creating is entitled, what we are raising are entitled children. It's the same with the drug problem. People who used to think it was the problem here, the affluent. No, now you have a junkie with Dora, and you have a junkie with heroin, which is on the other side of the spectrum. So maybe the parenting gap is what is missing.
I'm digressing a bit. You are emphasizing a lot about this entitlement as quite central to the problem. Do we really have these talks with the young people around the lifestyle of their parents, and then they begin to get this entitlement? Because it's constantly coming back as part of estate management, where children are not groomed properly to work hard. Like you said, the white people normally, they really put emphasis on that. But do the youth, she's here, representing the youth, right? Are they given enough information around working hard, let entitlement become secondary, and, working it through life? That could solve a lot of the problems around the estate.
Do you want to answer on behalf of the youth?
It's on behalf of the youth and also my point of view. So I would say, especially my generation, I think a few of us have this talk with their parents, especially those in the Adventist circles. Where we get these lessons is from church, from camp meetings, from wherever we go, that's church. But at home, it's not all about this talk. So you find out the parents, their generation, just before us, they are having this effort of moving from the rural areas and going to the towns, getting from this stage up to this stage. But as you were saying, in that process, they are neglecting the children, then focusing on making money. Then they will say, I've made money, but the child is still low. Talking to the issue of, Sister White says we have to resort to country living. But just because we are in the towns and we don't have the necessary skills of how to kusunga mombe, how kurima chakwa, but that's the era yata kuinda kwa iri. But in as much as we are supposed to have the skills on how to handle inheritance, how to keep the legacy of my parents, we also have to have technical skills, not necessary of handling a business, but also the general skills, kurima chakwa, because kurukuti pfuma ise yapera. You should resort back to farming, but still kana skills wow, still really long. So our generation pretty much is dead because at turina my skills, at technical know-how. Tukungora my university. After university kuna bus. Toswera tichasla tiro matown.
Mchiti nasi rate pakaipa.
Yeah, I think it's good we are discussing about it, and I think it would be quite unfair for us to expect the youths to have such skills. I think it is good for us to honestly assess those who think they have such skills and then determine where they got those skills. So from my basic opinion, the setup of people who lived during the era where the life somehow forced them to experience both worlds, the rural kind of setup, and a time when that work ethic was reinforced through communities and families. I think there is nothing that outlives or outdoes the ability to go to experience something. I don't think Vachko's father set him down and said, my son, you need to work hard. Of course, they might have spoken about it in passing, but the day-to-day life that he lived, perchance trained him actively. And to a certain extent, those who have that privilege, it somehow reinforced those skills that you now have and possess. So I don't think there's anything that can substitute experiencing that at a family level. And unfortunately, the family setup and the kind of lives that we live now don't have room to groom such skill. Unless you, I haven't finished, unless you actively, right now it needs you to purpose in your mind to teach it as opposed to the past. You didn't have to purpose and say, right now I want to make sure I teach my child these skills. Because somehow the day-to-day living, making sure you take cattle out of the kraal, that taking them to out of the kraal to the pastures, fighting there with others, swimming in the dam, equipped you with life skills. That is what they are now using and saying, yeah. So I think to a large extent, it also depends on us now. We are in a position where we have to consciously say, we need to train this. And unfortunately, training is not what can I say? It's a process, it's not an event. And because we are so much bogged up in fending for the family and what, those opportunities are rare to come by. You actually need to invest a lot of time. And so I think if we realize that, it will help us try to redirect our efforts and really reinforce the same skills, survival skills that we need to reinforce in our children.
I think Mama Tisha has just nailed it right on the head. Because if we have children who can't cook, maybe the girl child can't cook, because as we were growing up, these things, they were mainly very demarcated. Well, the boys were going out with the cattle and going into the farms and tilling the land and so forth. The girls would be cooking and whatever. So now we no longer have to go to the farm. We have to go to the supermarket for our meal, for our rice and everything, and the vegetables, they are there. I remember we used to water, when I was as young as grade 3, grade 4, when we came to Harare, we were staying there in Chitungwiza, there was an active, lively vegetable garden. We never had to buy vegetables. And no one would have to tell me that it's time to water the vegetables. At grade 3, grade 4, you would know this is my duty. And you would know, because if it was not done, no one would ask, why was it not done? You will just get beaten and you will know there's something that I didn't do. So there was no room to even not do it. And so now we have the maids in our homes, these helpers, they do the cooking. And so we might have one maid who is doing laundry and other babysitting duties. We hire a chef who can actually do the cooking. And so there's no room for the children to learn. They are just living their lives. They are bosses while they are 3, 4, and they are ordering all these helpers. They can't even clean our cars because it's the gardener's job. So, no, I'm not the gardener here. I can't be cleaning the car. Okay, take it to the car wash or something. They are responsible for nothing in most cases. They are just living their lives, and they want airtime for their phones. They are just, what do they call them now? The soft life ambassadors. That's what they call them now. The soft life ambassadors. So definitely we'll end up with those trusts, and nothing is sustained after the death of those who established those trusts, because they don't know how to do anything. They don't know how to work for whatever they get. So I think we just need, like he said, to be very deliberate in looking at ourselves and saying it's not abuse to get children to do certain things, to train them to do certain things within the home, because we will think it's abusive and to teach them how to get into town so they can walk around. And how do they get to know town if they're always in your car, you are driving them around? So they will need a GPS to get into town and move around. So if the battery is dead, they end up at the police station asking for directions to go home. That's the kind of children that we are now developing, because they can't find their way to where the combis are because they've never been in there. And at times we do it unconsciously, because we grew up in a very tough environment. I remember I went for grade 7 to write my entrance test at Nyazura. I left Chueshe on my own, got into Harare, got onto a bus to Mutare, dropped off by Nyazura and walked those 3 kilometers to the school on my own, without anybody else. I had to find my way there. Now if I try to do that with this one, my wife will kill me. It won't even happen. She will say, that can't even happen. Yeah. So, but as you were doing that, someone was saying, it has a way of toughening you. You were talking about how maybe some of our white brothers do it through sport, through all these different things and so forth. They give them the exposure and then deliberate training even on business, which we then don't necessarily do. So I think we just need to step back a little bit and ask ourselves, some of the things we have been told are abuse. Are they really abuse, or is just proper training for our children, and that will prepare them, like you said, to even then manage the legal documents? Then you can think of saying, okay, because these children are well trained, if I develop a trust, we can put in that trust to say once they reach 18, they become trustees, they have voting rights and so forth, and the grandchildren, once they reach a certain age, they can also then become not only beneficiaries, they can be trustees, they have voting rights so that they are not just overridden. And because you are confident you have done your job, you know once they have decision-making power, they are going to make the right decisions.
In fact, what I find is that if you find that you need to rule from the grave, and if you are afraid to die because you think my children are going to suffer, then it's time to make a change now. Because you must have utmost confidence. But I have this one. They'll be fine.
All right. He had asked the takeaway lessons. I think for me, what you said, what is profound is when it comes to setting up trust, you are better off starting now when you don't have a lot of assets. Then you start accumulating assets into the trust. Because I think the most, one of the critical reasons for estate planning is to limit your tax obligations. Because if you acquire assets and they are in your name, on the other hand, you are also acquiring liabilities in the form of estate duty. So I think that's profound to those who are planning to gather wealth. You are better off setting the trust now, then just put the assets into the trust, rather than then transferring from your name and putting them into the trust.
Thank you. By the way, I'm not saying wills and trusts are bad. No, far from it. They're excellent instruments that we all need to have in place, because people respect things that are written. Those who actually write wills and say, I want to be buried in Msarabani, people will respect that more than Mzukuru coming and saying, my Sekuru said he wants to be buried in Msarabani. Even in terms of distribution, you may have a sentimental thing that you want to leave to a certain person. If you don't write it down, that person won't get it. So this whole discussion was focused on raising worthy beneficiaries because of the practicalities of the problems that I've seen in reality. But I've also given you examples where it works. So it works. They are good instruments. That should not be taken away from them. I was just demonstrating that no matter how good they are, unless we raise our children to be able to produce their own wealth and add on to what we leave for them, then perhaps we should rethink who we leave our wealth to or how we leave it. So wills are good and necessary. Trusts can be very useful, are also useful. You may not have need for one, but if you do, it's certainly a good instrument. Now you all look depressed. You can leave everything to me, don't worry. I think for today, unless there's any other practical issue, anybody would want his burning to, yes.
Forget about God himself. I think in raising the kids, God should actually be the center, even in the runnings and whatever we'll do. And then even in our thinking of how we would live things, I think let's also include God to actually influence our decisions in that. Because once we leave God out of our properties and out of these decisions that we were discussing, and we say, this is my wealth, I wanted to do this, and God is not included, or God is not part of that. So the stewardship aspect now comes into play. So I just wanted to say, let's remember God as we do all the plannings.
Amen.
If I may just run us down, some of us will say, I think I don't have anything to put in a will. What people generally put in a will, what is it that you might want to say, okay, now, okay, all this one is put in a will, wow, okay, so then I have something to put in a will.
Ah. Okay, all right. I had explained that property is anything you own. So even if you want to say, all my clothes, those are the only earthly goods you have, you can you can put in a will. There's no minimum. No minimum value that will entitle you to bequeath in a will. So if you have $10 and you want to leave it, you want it to be managed a certain way on your death, you write that. Anything that you have. If you have 5 goats, that's property. So there's no minimum. You can even write, like I was saying, this will only work if you tell someone you trust that you've put where you want to be buried in your will, so that as soon as the event happens, they know that they need to get the will, so that people will know where you want to be buried. If they disrespect that because there's no money to do that, that's another thing. But your wishes would have been spelled out. Okay, thank you. The last one.
I think there is this quote that describes the situation between parents and children. It says, tough situations create strong men. Then strong men create weak men. Then in turn, weak men create tough situations. Then the cycle continues. So the tough situations, I did this to end this, I walked this long, I had to do this. In turn, the parents have money, but they will create weak men because there are no tough situations to do that. So I think as to parents, they should try to simulate those tough situations in order to maintain that strongness in the children. So just try as much as possible, be creative. I don't know how you do it, but create those tough situations so that strong men still remain in the cycle. So
actually, you know where your dad got the ideas from. You can start by walking home now. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and listening. I think it's almost 5 and it has been a long day. Maybe I can hand over to my elder Fungura, who can wind up the day for us.
Thank you very much. I think we can rise and have a song. And as we do that, we want to thank Chivia family as well for visiting with us and spending the day with us. We are thankful, and may you pass on our gratitude to your church as well for coming to serve. So I think we'll ask for a song, after which I think we'll ask Elder Klaba to then pray for us. Who's a good musician? Matisha or Musa? Or Musa? Musa.
We'll sing number 215. The home where changes never come, no pain, no sorrow, no care. Yes, 'tis a bright and blessed home. Who would not fain be resting there? Oh, wait, meekly wait and murmur not. Oh, wait, meekly wait and murmur not. Oh, wait, oh, wait, oh, wait, and murmur not. Yet when bowed down beneath the Lord, by him not loved thine earthly Lord, thou yes to reach the blessed abode. Wait me, and murmur not. Oh, wait, meekly wait and murmur not. Oh, wait, meekly wait and murmur not. Oh, wait, oh, wait, oh, wait, and murmur not. Toil on, or dim though so it be, on Zion head one prayer for God. The day of rest will dawn for thee. Wait meekly, wait and murmur not. Oh, wait, meekly wait and murmur not. Oh, wait, meekly wait and murmur not. Oh,